Hey everybody, this is Russ from Metro Gamecore. So if you saw one of my earlier videos, about a month ago I went on travel and ended up getting COVID right at the beginning of the trip. And so I ended up spending about a week stuck in a hotel with just my handheld devices. And at first I thought, hey, this is like heaven on earth, this is amazing. But as the days dragged on, I kind of wished that I had something a little bit bigger to play with. And unfortunately, I hadn't brought anything to plug my devices into the TV in my hotel room. And so that got me thinking about how could I build my own travel-friendly setup. And my idea here was to grab a portable-friendly screen, but then also pair it with a stand that is somewhat travel-friendly, and then also some sort of way of plugging it in that isn't going to be a nuisance. And so after kind of shopping around for a bit and testing out a few things, I ended up going with the setup that you're seeing here. And so this is going to be a bit of a low-key video where I just show you how I have my setup and why I picked it to be this way. And I also want to test out the convenience and performance of this with various handheld devices that do have video out capability. And on top of that, I decided to test out two different types of screens. One is just a 1080p LCD panel just made for budget and portability, but then I also went all the way up onto the high end of the spectrum. I got an OLED display with 4K and a built-in battery that lasts 4 hours. Because let's face it, all of us want to play Steam Deck on an OLED display, and I thought this would be the perfect opportunity. And so I had a lot of fun putting this video together. I love just testing little things like this, seeing if I can plug in things and what will work and what won't. And hopefully you're going to enjoy this too. So without any further delay, let's jump into it. Okay, to start, for the first monitor we're going to be testing, it's going to be this AWOW1, and I've done a dedicated video on this. I'll leave it linked in the video description. And I'm also going to use a cheap portable tablet stand. This one is called the FS02 by Lamicall, and it costs $10 on Amazon. It comes in both white and black. And then next, we're just going to use one charging plug to get all this connected together. This is a 65-watt charger from AceFast that actually has video out capability. And so essentially, it can do the work of a USB dock while still just being a regular old plug. And at $50, I thought that functionality might be worth testing. So let's do quick unboxings here of the accessories before we start getting into the build. Now, when it came to choosing a stand, I was a little bit picky about this whole thing, because when it comes down to it, a lot of these monitors have their own like little slip-on case that often can function as a stand. The problem is that they can't be used at multiple angles. And so I wanted to use this one here for a number of different reasons. Number one, it's super lightweight, and on top of that, it can actually shift to two different heights. All you have to do is kind of push this button here in the center. It's pretty convenient. And on top of that, it can be used at various angles, and because it's quite stiff, it actually feels very sturdy at any of these angles. So overall, I thought for $10, this is going to do the job nicely. So as an example here, let me put it up against the monitor. We're going to use a larger setup here in a minute, but I just want to show you what it looks like here on my desk. And so I'll zoom out here, and it's kind of hard to tell just from this angle, but man, this thing is super sturdy. So I feel completely comfortable holding it up with a stand like this, and the monitor is 15.6 inches altogether. And so in terms of sizing, that probably gives you a pretty good idea of how big that stand is. When you see it against the back here, it goes about halfway up the monitor altogether. Okay, now we're going to talk about this charger, and I gotta say, of all the things here, this might have actually been the most exciting thing. And I get it, it sounds kind of silly to be excited about a wall plug, but this is the only one I've ever seen that also has an HDMI out. And so think of it this way, this is like a Nintendo Switch dock, right? You can plug it in, it'll charge up your Switch, and then also it'll give you the video out to your TV at the same time. And it does all of that while still being about the same size as just the regular old plug for the Switch itself. It also has a USB-A charger here. It's only 5 watts, but it'll do the job to power a monitor at the same time. And I gotta say, it comes with a really nice heavy-duty braided cable, USB-C to USB-C. And this is also capable of giving a video signal too. A cable like this on its own usually costs something like $20. So for it to be part of a $50 charger is pretty awesome. And so here is my planned setup. I'm going to use the USB-C cable to connect to my device, and then I'll use the HDMI cable to connect to the monitor. And so that way it can power up the device and maybe charge it if the battery is low, but then also provide a video out signal to a monitor which is also being powered by the charger. So I already mentioned the LCD panel, but let's look at the Big Daddy here. This is the one that I haven't reviewed before. It's by a company called Innocn. And the company actually reached out to me and said, hey, we saw that other monitor review you did, it was pretty cool, but why don't you try something at a bit of a higher tier? And so that's what we have to work with here. As you can see, it is an OLED panel. It's also 15.6 inches, but it's also 4K and 60 Hertz, and it runs at a great contrast ratio as well. And it does look like a pretty serious monitor. It has a color calibration report and everything. Inside the manual, you're going to find diagrams about everything that comes in the box, and then an explanation for its fairly thorough menu settings as well. It actually comes with a charging brick for the monitor itself, but of course we can also just use the other charger. It has two different USB-C cables, one specifically for video and the other one for power. And finally, it also comes with a mini HDMI to regular HDMI cable. Now this one also comes with a case, and it's a pretty sturdy tablet case, as you can see. And so let's take a quick look at the monitor itself before I hook it up. Now it might be a little bit hard to see in the video here, but the metal sides to it actually have a greenish tint to them. As far as I/O, we have the HDMI input, two different USB-C inputs, one of the two stereo speakers, and then the volume down and up buttons, as well as a power and menu button, and then also an LED indicator for when it's on. On the other side, all we have is just the other stereo speaker. And this thing feels really high quality. The logo itself is actually engraved into the back here. And yeah, it feels really nice. Like I mentioned, it does have a bit of a green tint to the metal here. I kind of like it. This is what it looks like inside of the case, and the case can be used as a stand. But like with a lot of these other stands, it just kind of folds over and it gives you one angle to work with. And it is a pretty good standard angle, but this is one of the reasons why I wanted to get that separate stand, which, as you can see here, works really well. It also goes about halfway up the monitor here, but I will say that you can't use the case and the stand at the same time. So you will have to take it out of the case in order to make it fit perfectly. Okay, so I think that's a pretty good setup in terms of what we're going to be using here. We've got the stand that we'll use to hold up the monitor. Then we have our charging plug to be able to charge our device, as well as the HDMI output to the monitor. And then we're going to test it against these four different devices here. On the top left, we have a Windows device, the Innocn RetroPower 2021. On the bottom left, we have the Steam Deck. On the top right, we have a Nintendo Switch OLED edition. And finally, on the bottom right, we have the Android device, the Innocn OLED. So we're going to shift over to my future studio. I've been working on this place for a while now, and it's almost ready for reveal. To start, we'll plug in the Nintendo Switch into the charger here, and then I'll set up the HDMI output, and then of course the stand to hold up the monitor. We'll start with the LCD one first, and so then we're going to plug the HDMI into the LCD panel, and then finally we'll use the 5-watt charger to plug in and power the monitor itself. And so here we go, we're playing Nintendo Switch on a single wall charger that is both running and charging the Nintendo Switch at the same time, and then also powering the monitor too. And so theoretically, this setup could be used in any place that just has one single charger. For example, if you had a vehicle that had the ability to use a wall plug, or at a hotel room, or in an airport, or even on an airplane, all these ways could work. It'd probably be a little bit obnoxious on a plane, so maybe not that one. Okay, Nintendo Switch works great. Now let's try the exact same setup, but with a Steam Deck. And sure enough, it worked perfectly. It scaled correctly. It immediately started charging the Steam Deck at the same time. And then from there, I could use the Steam Deck for the controls, or I could hook up a Bluetooth controller like this one and just get right into the games. Now, one of the things I did notice while starting up Doom Eternal here is that it defaulted to a 16:10 aspect ratio. And that's the original aspect ratio of the Steam Deck, so my guess here is that it just defaulted to that. And to be perfectly honest, I totally actually didn't notice that it was at a wrong aspect ratio while I was testing this footage. But I did test it later, and yes, absolutely, you can play the games in 16:9. So just like with the Switch, playing Steam Deck on this works out really well. Next, let's move on to the Innocn OLED. So we're going to do some Android testing here. And this is the OLED Pro, which is capable of video out via USB-C. And just like with the others, I plugged it in and it worked great. It also started charging the device immediately too. Now I just started setting up my OLED at this point because I had just been flashing it for dual boot with Windows, but I did have a couple of emulators set up already, and as you can see here I'm playing PSP with no problem. One of the cool things is this monitor is a 1080p monitor, and the OLED itself is also a 1080p display. And so they have a perfect parity between their resolution and aspect ratio between these two. And so you're not going to have to fiddle with the settings to make sure it works on a better screen. It's just going to work. Okay, so now we're batting 3 for 3. All three devices worked perfectly with this setup. Next, let's try a Windows device, the Innocn RetroPower 2021. And I'm happy to report that this worked exactly the way I wanted it to as well. It started to immediately charge the device, and I was able to play video out. And so in the end, I think this is a great setup. We're looking at a $10 stand, a $50 charger, and then also a monitor that costs about $140. And so altogether, we're looking at about $200 to get this set up here. And to me, when I was stuck in a hotel room for a week straight, I would have easily paid $200 to have this set up right here. So in that regard, I think this is a pretty good deal. But now let's move on to the big dogs. We're going to try that OLED panel next. Now we can do things a little bit differently if we wanted to with this one. Because it runs off of a battery, we wouldn't actually need to charge the monitor all the time. And like I mentioned before, the battery lasts about 4 hours altogether. But much like with that LCD panel, the entire setup can be exactly the same and it works really well. And while that LCD panel is nice and rich and vibrant, it doesn't compare to this OLED display here. I'm probably not giving the image quality the justice it deserves, but man, it looks nice. And so while we have it plugged in, let me go into the menu here and show off what's going on. Initially, I thought I had to press the volume buttons to move the menu up and down, but then I remembered that this thing has a 10-point touch display. And so in order to change the menu, you actually just tap on it and make your changes. And if you've ever had to navigate a monitor's menu system, you know that this is pretty cool. And it has features like a game mode, which will give you a 1 millisecond response time, and you can also manually configure the different inputs between HDMI and USB-C. So next up, I wanted to test OLED with the Steam Deck. This is probably the main reason why I wanted to test this monitor in the first place. And sure enough, it looks incredible. The colors are so rich and saturated, the blacks are nice and deep too. Now one thing that's kind of neat about this as well, if you plug the device in directly via USB-C, as you can see here, not only will it give a video input signal, but you can also use the touchscreen to navigate the device itself. And so with something like the Steam Deck, which has a touchscreen interface, you can actually just touch the monitor to navigate through the experience. And like with the other 1080p panel, this 4K panel also scaled correctly too. And so here I am playing Hades on an OLED display using a battery charged monitor, which was actually charging the Steam Deck at the same time too. Of course, that will deplete the monitor battery by a little bit as well, and the charge to the Steam Deck was really just a trickle. It wasn't going to be something very significant either. But all the same, it's kind of cool to see the possibilities that can be done just on a single battery charge from the monitor. Now next I wanted to test out Android, and so I used the Innocn OLED, and I gotta say, of all the touchscreen responses, this one seemed to be the most responsive. And that makes sense because Android is built for touchscreen interfaces. Now another thing here is that I didn't want to just drain the monitor battery, and so I also plugged that in using the other USB-C port. And so here, now what I'm doing is I'm charging the monitor, plus use that USB-C plug, giving the video signal as well as the touchscreen interface to the monitor itself. And so essentially this gives you the ability to use an Android device like the Innocn OLED in sort of a tablet mode instead. As you can imagine, there's quite a lot of possibilities you could do with this. And finally, the last setup here is to plug in the Windows device, again via USB-C, which is going to allow me to use the touchscreen interface. And like with the others, it worked really well. Although if I'm going to be honest, the touchscreen navigation of using a Windows device like this is just not great. I mean, Microsoft just really hasn't seemed to be able to crack the code in using Windows with a touchscreen. But regardless, it did work well enough. As you can see here, I'm emulating the Wii U, and I'm just using the gamepad built into the Aya Neo here. But one kind of nifty thing I saw about the Wii U is that because the Wii U screen acts like the actual Wii U gamepad, you can use the touchscreen within Windows to emulate the Wii U pad. And so to put that all together, I'm playing a Nintendo Wii U game using a touchscreen interface on a large tablet size. And yeah, that's kind of cool. Okay, so now let's wrap up the whole experience and what I actually thought was worth keeping. Number one, we have that $10 stand. It gives you 2 different heights and you can extend it to multiple angles. Not only that, it's very travel friendly and super sturdy. So when it comes to a $10 stand, I think this thing is no brainer. I always see a lot of like metal stands out there and those have never made sense to me. I feel like if they are going to crash down, the metal is going to damage whatever we're holding up and it's going to be heavier than it needs to. And so I think this plastic one here is a winner. Next, we have that $50 charger from AceFast. This thing will charge your device at 60 watts and then another 5 watts for other accessories. On top of that, it can directly do video out. And so essentially this works like a Nintendo Switch dock or like a USB-C hub. And the travel-friendly size of this makes it perfect to just hide behind a TV or take with you on a road trip or so on. So again, $50, I think it's well worth it. But now let's get to the part that I was actually a little bit torn about, and that's going to be a comparison of these 2 displays. We'll start with that AWOW display here on the left first. In terms of things I like, number one, the LCD panel is very vibrant. I talked about this in depth with my actual review of it, which I'll have linked in the video description below. In terms of IPS panels, this is probably one of the most saturated I've ever seen. It really makes the colors pop and it's just a joy to use. Next, it has multiple power options. It has a micro USB plug, as well as 2 different power options for USB-C inputs too. And of course, it has a mini HDMI input for the video signal on its own as well. In terms of weight, it's actually fairly lightweight. It's about 700 grams altogether. And finally, the price just can't be beat. $140 for an LCD panel like this is just kind of crazy. I think when I reviewed it, it was $200. At $140, this thing is a steal. I think these portable monitors have gone a long way in terms of quality. If I was to give one negative for this monitor, it would be the menu navigation experience. It has a small little notch on the right side where you push it in and then navigate using up and down controls. And it's just not great, but it usually is never great for monitors like this. Okay, so now let's talk about the other one from the company Innocn. Like I mentioned before, this has an OLED panel, and it's also a 4K resolution. It's just kind of amazing to look at. Ever since this thing came in the mail, I've been thinking of various ways that I can get this to fit on my desk just so I can have it around all the time. It looks that beautiful. I was also surprised to find that I really found the touchscreen interface to be very useful. It's really kind of neat to be able to just kind of touch through these Steam Deck controls right there immediately on the screen. And when it comes to kind of transforming your Android device into a tablet, that was also kind of neat too. The 5000 milliamp hour battery here gives you about 4 hours of playtime. And despite having a battery inside and being an OLED panel, it's still fairly lightweight. It's 950 grams altogether. So that's just a little bit over 2 pounds. And it was pretty impressive to find that it has a 1 millisecond response time too, which is pretty neat for a portable monitor like this. Now, I would say there are two negatives to this monitor. The first is the price. This thing is $680 on Amazon right now. And I think that if you look at all the features on their own, you know, an OLED panel, 4K display, touchscreen, battery, all that kind of stuff, sure, I could see the argument for a $680 monitor. But when you put it side by side with a monitor that costs $140, I have a hard time saying that the feature difference between the two is worth $540 to me. But I think if you want a really premium experience, this is still something worth considering. The only other negative I really have for this monitor is that the chin on this was more significant than I thought it would be. My suspicion here is that they were trying to find space to cram in that battery, and honestly, having a chin at the bottom of the display isn't as bad as having like larger bezels. But all the same, this was definitely something I noticed, especially when compared to the much cheaper monitor on the left. So really that's about it for this video. I just wanted to show off the possibilities you have when it comes to traveling with a retro handheld device, when it comes to a time that you want to have something a little bit bigger than the thing in your hands. And like I mentioned, you know, getting sick and being stuck in a hotel room is kind of the catalyst for this whole video idea. You know, you never know when you're going to want to have something like this. And honestly, for future trips, I'm probably going to be packing one of these monitors too. As far as which one I'm going to grab, I'm not really sure yet. I think it's probably going to be the nicer touchscreen one. But if I was in your shoes and I had to pick from the very beginning, I think I'd probably go with the $140 one. I think you just get a lot more bang for your buck that way. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. Would you ever see yourself in a situation where you might want to have a portable monitor like this? And if so, what kind of setup is most appealing to you? I'm also interested to hear what devices you would hook up to this. I really only thought about these 4 different device use cases, but sure, you could play all sorts of things on here. You could use a cell phone that has video out capability, or even tuck away a mini PC to take on your adventure too. Anyway, I'm curious to hear what you think in the comments below. As always, thank you for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.